three topics to address that. Two are demand-related, one supply. So from a demand perspective, as Daniel said, significant demand for gas in Australia comes from industry. So for all of the gas that is produced in Australia, about 10% of it is used by households, about 90% of it is used by industry. Now that also includes LNG exports, which are so critical to our economy, but the big proportion of that comes from industry. And quite frankly, and quite simply, there is no alternative to gas in industries such as steel manufacturing, cement manufacturing, fertiliser manufacturing. The second one is around the role that GPG will play in our electricity system, in particular in generating electricity over time. And the irony is that as our coal-fired generators come out of the system, and as Daniel said, and we all know that coal is going to come out of the system, we actually need more gas-fired power generation to come into the system to provide the spinning reserve, to provide the flexibility that is needed to complement the renewables that will also come into the system. So in the NEM, we have around 6 to 7% of the electricity generated through gas-fired power generation. That will increase, obviously, as a proportion significantly. The AEMO data, Daniel, I think it's about 13 gigawatts of GPG that's estimated to be required in the system. There are others out there that get it up to about 20 gigawatts. And then you've got things such as data centres coming in. When you look at what's happening in the US, they are going to have about 12% of their electricity coming from, demand for electricity coming from data centres up until 2030. And they need about 46 gigawatts, about 80 new gas-fired power generators. So there's this significant demand for GPG required as well. The third thing I'll say is just on supply, and you'll hear rumours around the market that there isn't enough gas supply in Australia, or there isn't enough capacity to store or transport gas, and it is not true. There is an abundance of gas available to us in this country. A lot of it needs to come to surface, and there are a number of big projects such as the Beetaloo, the Surat Basin, new solutions coming through down here in Victoria. So there is an abundance of supply, and there is the capacity to be able to transport that gas. And we've just announced a fairly significant pipeline project as an example to be able to increase the capacity of the East Coast gas grid by about 25% for a fairly modest amount of capital by expanding the existing assets that we have.
We will publish in the next month or so a draft Victorian transmission plan. This will lay out a number of draft proposed renewable energy zones for Victoria, and also the upgrades in the system and any new transmission that we believe we need to support those renewable energy zones. And it really is those zones, the old gag, to a person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, to me, every problem in the modern society can be solved by a really good renewable energy zone. It originally, a kind of technical concept about designing transmission and generation in a really integrated way, and so minimising cost to the consumer over time. But I think as the concepts developed, we certainly see it as an opportunity for economic development. We see it as an opportunity to think about housing, to think about transport in places, to think about local infrastructure, and to think about kind of legacy economic change to make sure the communities that host, and new communities that host this infrastructure really see the economic opportunity that comes from the energy transition and helps with more sustainable communities. And we've obviously got a huge amount of work to do to engage with people and to have those discussions. So we're really excited, I think that's the word I'll choose, about the opportunity to publish that plan. A really important part of this is to engage the whole community, regional and urban, in what does this mean for you genuinely? What are your fears and hopes for it? And how can we as an industry genuinely help you with that? Because there really is a perception when we get out and talk to people that folk are just showing up to make a fortune, and people are collateral damage. So the most exciting opportunities I see are where local community leaders are emerging and saying, how do we grab this opportunity to make this community really sustainable in the broadest sense of the word, you know, kids at the primary school coming through and going to the technical colleges.
Again, that power of collaboration.
Yeah,
Liz, did you have a comment to make?
absolutely. I'd maybe just pick up on the energy poverty part of that question as well, and just acknowledge, you know, as Alistair's mentioned, I think the whole energy sector and renewable transition has been divisive for regional communities, but also in cities as well. I think, you know, we need to work on how do we have more reliable energy supply in regional towns, and then in the cities, how do we make sure that, and the regional areas as well, how do we make sure that costs are attributed fairly on consumers' bills? How do we make, and so tariff reform is really important there. How do we ensure that everybody can access consumer energy resources, the battery, the rooftop solar panels, even with electrification? We're finding that there are some barriers for low-income households to electrify their household. We're doing a trial in Morwell where we're helping low-income households electrify, and it's received really positively. There are genuine annual savings on your energy bills in the thousands, but the cost to get the infrastructure and potentially rewire your house is significant. So there's a place for grants and subsidies and support there.
So batteries are really important here, because if you put a battery in the network and you spread that benefit across all consumers, you don't need to have solar on your roof, and you don't need to be an owner of a home. And I sometimes worry that the transition that's happening at the moment is equivalent to rolling out fibre optic broadband for wealthier homeowners. Because if you don't own your house, if you're a renter, or if you live in an apartment, or you live in social housing, you can't put solar on your roof. So where we put a community battery in, and it costs half the dollars per kilowatt hour to a home battery, that benefit is spread across everyone. And I think that's one of the benefit of networks generally, is that we're sort of socialist enterprises. We spread our costs and we spread our benefits, but everyone gets the value. And we're talking more about that, but I'm not sure that paradigm has really landed yet, where if we spread this out across everyone in a network, everyone can get the benefit. And we need to do that, or we're going to lose people in the journey.
Yeah, very, very important that we navigate our way through this transition in a way that works for all consumers, not just those who can afford to put solar on their roof. And I think that occupies the minds of a lot of us in the industry right now. We've got a few minutes to go. I've held off asking this question until the end, but it's now got 17 votes. So I don't think we can avoid this one. And it's in relation to current events. So there's a question here around what are the chances we will have an event like the nationwide blackout that's recently been experienced in Spain, which I'm sure a lot of you from the industry are following quite carefully. I think before I hand this challenge of answering this question over to the panel, we should probably caveat that it's very important that we don't speculate at this current point in time, that we obviously wait for the evidence and the outcomes from those involved. So perhaps rather than putting this panel on the spot and encouraging more wild rumours about what may or may not have occurred in Spain, perhaps we can tailor the question to one around how do we ensure as we navigate through this transition that we do end up with a resilient system? Maybe I'll pass that out to the panel to give some thought to.
I'll just bring up an interesting paradox. So I'm fairly new to networks still, only 2 years into it, but I find it interesting that you can have a storm come through and knock out 50 to 100,000 customers for 24 hours, and there's a general high level of tolerance for that. Obviously, we'd rather the power didn't go out, but the power does go out in all our networks from time to time because of storms. But we all know in network land that if the wind stopped blowing for 24 hours and you had no power, it would be a calamity. I find that quite interesting. I don't know how we solve that, but I'm not commenting on Spain, which is obviously a big thing. And I hear actually, the bit I've read is that it's actually some form of electrical storm. It's not a renewable power outage. But we have a very low tolerance for what's going to happen with renewables, but a very high tolerance for storms. And I can't quite work out why that is.
I've spent my career gripped, I think is the right word, by blackouts and sort of studying blackouts. And I think Louisa puts it well. We're right in that stage where people are talking without any knowledge about what's actually happened. I said to my wife when I saw it, it's terrible, and the pictures remind us how critical electricity is in a modern economy. But this will be hilarious because it looks like it was something pretty complicated, and we're going to hear a lot of really simplistic answers and opinions about it. I'm really eager to hear what's gone on and to understand it. But blackouts have been happening in power systems, and I mean system-wide blackouts, since we had electricity systems. There are inevitably 4, 5, 6, 7 things that come together at once. Inevitably, the people operating the system either didn't understand how much trouble they were in, or didn't have the time to respond to how much trouble they were in. And I'm sure this will be the same